Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my guide for Righteous Fire Scion. From the humble beginnings of killing Katava in Act 10, to playing a life-based version all the way into the early red maps and farming the initial 10 divines, roughly give or take, of currency you need to swap over to Ivory Tower, this is a build that you can play for the entirety of the league, just progressing and min-maxing as you go, because it doesn't just stop at the early game and the early Ivory Tower swap. Each gear piece you upgrade will continue to make this character better and better. Initially, it's on the rougher side. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for a league start, but it is something that you can do if you really like Righteous Fire, or you just want to build you can min-max throughout the entire league. This does end up becoming a Planet Eater build, so to speak, with nigh immortality and very good damage if you min-max it. But to get there, it's going to be a journey and a step-by-step gear progression of each piece. And of course, just for the fun of it, I'm showcasing what this build becomes in standard with legacy gear, because things get a little bit silly when you get to upgrade to Legacy Shaper's Touch and Adorned. As you can see, the number is 200,000 energy shield there. And yeah, it's just a little bit of a silly fun thing you can do in standard if you care about that sort of thing for build progression after a league. Now let's get into the basics of the character. First off, with a very important message. This is not a League Start guide. I'm making this because I had a lot of fun with it in Pox League 2. I played this back in Crucible League. It's probably my favorite build. It's Righteous Fire, and it's the best version of it I've ever played. I think it's, there is some comparisons to be made with Guardian and with Hyro, the mana versions, back when Necropolis had the mana print mod and stuff. But ultimately, I think this is probably the top version of Righteous Fire from my personal experience. Now, that being said, let's get into how does this build progress? Well, there's a few different stages of the build, and I have all of them to showcase in game, but we'll go through the text version of it real quick. We're starting out with Spectral Throw, leveling as Peaconk. I have made, if you look at the tree and the gear progressions, there's a loadout here, which shows you a lot of different versions of this. And for one, it's the Spectral Throw start into Poison Concoction. Scion does not have a lot of good options for its early game in terms of its early tree. It's just not very strong. So you want to do what's one of the best possible things. And from my testing, Spectral Throw all the way till about level 12 when you get to the Merveil Caves into Poisonous Concoction feels quite good. Now after that, you will play Poisonous Concoction into roughly around level 18, 20-ish in Act 2, at which point you have enough passives to respec all these nodes. The cool thing is, normally you couldn't do something like this before gold was the thing, but since they made a gold a thing with cheaper respecs, you can actually respec your entire early game tree with the gold you get. Make sure you're not just blowing all your gold on black market early on, because you're going to need that initial 12 or so respecs to be able to go bop, 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 and swap over to this here. Initially, between 12 and 18, you're like, what am I doing with those passives? You're just grabbing the nodes of this tree and you're just starting to spec it out. By the time you get to level 18, the respec will be ready to go. Now, one thing I will say is if you look over at the gear pieces here, I assembled some basic things to showcase what you need to do for this setup. When you're starting Righteous Fire early, the key piece is this mastery right here. Regen 1 life per second per uncapped res. That means every fire res above 1 is giving you 1 regen. So the important thing we're doing here is we're grabbing ruby rings, which you can get with a vendor recipe of an iron ring plus a red gem. I'd recommend, if you have extra red gems laying around, make sure you just hold on to those and wait to use them at a vendor recipe, because you can check the different red gems until you get a higher roll on the ruby ring. Like, for example, a 20 res ring versus a 30 res ring is a pretty big upgrade. I would generally say try to re-roll your rings until you get a 25 or higher. Something like that is usually worth it. And then you're just bench crafting fire res on pretty much every open slot. Like, you have a 10% movement speed boots. Let's say you have a random shield that has, your double green red socket for your movement skill. Let's say you have a heavy belt. You're just bench crafting fire res on pretty much every open suffix of gear you have. And this should put you around 150 fire res, thus giving you around 150 regen. This will allow you to click Righteous Fire right away. And you'll be using, normally I would say Fire Trap is the best skill to go with Righteous Fire right away, but with the Fire Trap nerfs, along with the Scorching Ray buffs, Scorching Ray, I think, might actually just be outright better now with the changes they made, because they gave Scorching Ray a 30% more damage buff and a Fire Trap about a 10% damage nerf, which I think that'll level the playing field. Ultimately, Scorching Ray was something you did in the late game where you waited to swap over to it, because Scorching Ray only outweighed Fire Trap when its buff of having the extra minus res, because it does a really big exposure. It only outweighed Fire Trap once you got enough Righteous Fire damage where that exposure amount was the difference in making it better than Fire Trap. Now I think that's just right away, and I would go straight to doing the Fire or Scorching Ray instead of Fire Trap. And I have some gem link recommendations here for both that setup as well as the Peaconk setup of the initial gems. You can see right here, it's pretty much just a, hey, volley momentum, swap that to Poisonous Concoction once you get to that level. Or with, for example, you start out with Leap Slam when you have the two-handed sword, but then you swap to Shield Charge once you go to a shield with Poisonous Concoction. That sort of thing is going on there. And then we have what is our gem links and setups throughout going just through the campaign. I have recorded footage. I did 2 Scion Righteous Fire campaign runs. I will link that in the description of the video so you can watch if you want to see this leveling progression in action. We did them about 4-hour 10 minutes or 4-hour 5 minutes and a 4-hour 28 minutes. I definitely think sub 4 is pretty doable on Scion. I'm not the best speedrunner. I'm okay. I've been learning. I've been getting better ultimately. But I think that's pretty solid for a Righteous Fire Scion League start. So anyways, this goes over the initial tree as I was speccing it out, getting towards the end of the campaign. And then from there onward, we have roughly a, hey, we're going to get to around level 90-ish with life-based gear. We're going to farm up currency. And again, there are the skills and the items for this rough gear set, along with then going to the swap initial over to Ivory Tower. Roughly, I think this is going to cost you around 10 divines, I would expect, and I'll showcase the various options in game. And then later on, you can get up to dot cap in League, but this is a much higher invested build. So just showing you the general idea of the progression of the character on how you can take the character if you want to. So anyways, that's what's going on here in the nodes progression. I'm telling you the various gear progression sets and the upgrade line you have on the character. After that, it's pretty much about picking and choosing a gear piece to min-max based on cost versus power you get from it. And I gave you a rough list of how I would do this, or the order in which I would choose to do these various upgrades. For me, one of the first upgrades I do from that initial Ivory Tower gear upgrade would be go for a 8% defense enchant. 8% defense enchant is about a 1 in 4 in Tailoring Orbs. And Tailoring Orbs are generally quite cheap on the first few days of the league. So usually this is a very good, it's like 7%, I think 8% more ES that you get from clicking this. Very nice upgrade early on. And then so on and so forth. That's what this is going through. Now, I also did for the build a better trading extension. If you want this, you have to click and drag over and copy this. Don't press what I just pressed there, which wasn't Control C. All right, anyways, Control C that. This code you can then import into this extension. Better Trading is the one I have been using. You do import folder, Control V. It should say Scion RF Gagarf. If it doesn't say this, or clicking the searches and it doesn't work, then most likely there's some sort of user error on your end, I would wager, and you need to probably see about if you copy the whole text correctly. I don't know. I'm not tech support, so please don't ask me to fix it for you, because there are a slew of things, and 99% of the time it's some sort of user error that occurred. Anyways, this has a lot of the uniques in the build I'd recommend, along with some weighted sums for various gear slots. For example, we have a ring here, which has, I put some values next to various stats that I think are decent, and you can adjust the weighting as you upgrade this. That's what this stuff is for. Ultimately, there is a bit of min-maxing that can be done outside of these things, but this should give you a good start on gear progression and early ideas of what to go for buying gear for your character. Now, we're going to reference this again in the future. I obviously don't want this thing twice because I have it right here, but let's get in game and let's showcase you guys the various gear set progressions on the character we have assembled. Now, I'll move my camera a little bit over so you can see like the actual like HP life values and stuff. And let's go ahead and start off with the very beginning, which is when you just finish the campaign. I did this campaign run. This character was exactly how it was when I beat the campaign. It's pretty much just you're picking up rare gear and you're just chucking it on and you're making it work. You're getting life and res and you're just going with it. There's nothing, this is basically what you would have if you played SSF. Now, that being said, we play Trade League. Trade League has options like Pyre Ring, like Kikazaro, like Immortal Flesh. These items will be in the buy list. I just realized I haven't put Pyre and Kikazaro in there. I'll put them in the buy list for just easy pickups that you can do early on. Stuff like that will giga boost your leveling through the campaign and make it feel a lot better. But ultimately, there's no shame in just having random rare gear, just picking up and putting on the best life and res gear you can find while you're going through the campaign. This character run specifically, I had a very hard time getting an extra 3-link for my Scorching Ray, and so I played a 2-link Scorching Ray throughout the entire run's progression, and it looks like I forgot to even grab the passive point on Valenta, so a bit of a misplay there, but I'll just show you what it looks like in Desecrated Chambers, just so you can see what the character looks like. I really do like the early Pathfinder sub-ascendancy of the Scion, because it allows you to spam your Silver Flask pretty consistently. So I ended up deciding I like that more as my first lab. If you don't want to manage your life flask or your, sorry, not life flask, just your flasks in general as much, Guardian early lab works too. But I did end up deciding the early Pathfinder, just going Silver plus Quicksilver plus Ruby Flask, and being able to have those flasks at high uptime felt very good. I also like the other advantages. I can press Vaal RF and then press a life flask with it and just pair that timing so we just get that regen right away. I think that feels very good in combinations, but this is essentially what it looks like on, 4 hours of progression, or just when you get to however fast you do the campaign, roughly what you can expect at level 60-ish, having just done a campaign. Now we're out of Portal Scrolls, but that is the life-based gearing right away. After your initial campaign, you're going to go into maps, you're going to start farming some Chaos Orbs. You have the option to either A, giga boost your initial power level by doing a couple of demo contracts and just get the Chaos Orbs from the question marks rooms to the side, or B, you can just get into maps, farm whatever league mechanic, expedition, maybe you want to do beast farming, maybe you want to do ultimatum, whatever the league mechanic you want to farm is, farm your currency, and the thing you're initially doing is just trying to get a very basic gear set to make your life-based character decent enough to do red map content and farm currency there. What I would recommend is go for mediocre fractures. In the buy list, I have a buy list that has fractures that are like T3 or higher of life, resistances, fractures. These are fractures that are going to cost you next to nothing, because very few people are buying T3 level fractures. Most people care about the T1s, and on top of that, usually people care about specific ideal bases. For us, we're doing 2 unsets. You can do 1 less unset and maybe go for another res ring if you want to, but we had extra res sitting around, so I thought this was fine. And the idea is on your rings, you're going to go 1 Delirium Essence for dot multi and then do a benchcraft. Don't overthink it too much. That'll give you a decent shot for your initial rings. And then Calm's Heart, super cheap, unique early on because of the, I think it's a T2, which would mean it's rare generally, but the reason it's so cheap early on, I think, is related to the Calm Strong box, which starts appearing in lower level zones. Usually, a T2 unique that is a high level would be very low supply initially on the early economy, but because I believe Calm's Heart can occur early on because of the Calm's chest, it ends up usually on league starts not being very bad. Previous league starts I've done a Calm's Heart on was, we did the Berserker Slam League start in Settlers League, we did Necro Settlers Guardian, and we did, I believe, Pox League. No, not Pox League, Phorecia League. I did a Calm's Heart on each of those starters just because it's a very cheap, very powerful unique that doesn't cost a lot, and this ranged me from about 10 to 20 C. It does later on in day 1 spike to around, I think, 30, 40, 50 C, and then it goes back down. Typically, this is just a placeholder item. This is not your end game. If this item goes super expensive, just go with a rare chest piece with like armor and go for the percent. 15% life mastery is going to do you just fine. But I think for a trade league, usually this is a great option, generally around 10 to 20 C. If it's getting to a divine, don't even worry about it. That's way too much to pay for it, considering this life-based gearing is just a temporary placeholder while we farm for Ivory Tower. Aside from that, the only other thing you're doing that involves any level of crafting is, here I have a very mediocre fracture, and I did an Essence of Fear. Essence of Fear gives you minion damage. One of the few ways you can guarantee get percent damage on a weapon is Essence of Fear, and the reason we do that is for this node right here. Spiritual Aid allows percent damage scaling from minion damage from this node, as well as the wheel nodes going up here, along with it gives us percent damage on our scepter. This is just a starter, league starter thing. It's just a cheap way to get percent damage or an okay damage scepter. Ultimately, I have a weighted sum search for one-handed weapons as well that you can use, and you might be able to outright buy something that beats this pretty cheap on trade. It just kind of varies depending on how expensive or how popular Righteous Fire is. And then for the shield, I'd recommend a Shaper Shield, and you can make this through doing Reforged Life or Pristine Fossils. On average, a Pristine Fossil will give you, I think, Recover on block. I looked it up on Craft of Exile. I believe it was a 1 in 6. I don't have any Pristine Fossils on hand, so I'm going to quick reroll Fossil to Pristine real quick here just to showcase this. I said, hey, I'm going to showcase Pristine Fossils. I proceed to hit Pristine. Let me hit all the valuable fossils that aren't Pristine. This is what I get for accidentally misclicking and rolling over Pristine on the first try. But just for the sake of the example, I'll showcase hitting Recover on block real quick here. It's a 1 in 6 in Craft of Exile. From Reforged Life testing, it felt like a 1 in 10 to 1 in 15. Either way, it's not very hard to hit. It's just this one mod, Recover on block. It's gonna be awkward if I don't hit it in 10, because I just said it was a 1 in 6 on Craft of Exile. There it is, Recover on block. This doesn't have to be anything complicated, just an initial Recover on block, plus I would probably do a crafted block. Chance craft is all you really need on this shield. You can make it a little bit nicer than this, but just initially, getting Recover on block with chance to block feels quite good. Between Tempest Shield, Guardian, Sub-Ascendancy, and these 4 nodes here, we actually run quite a fair amount of block. This has 50 attack block, or sorry, 50 spell block and about 68 attack block, which is very good for the investment, and it feels quite good when you have a decent life pool for the initial tank or defenses of the basic life set of gear. Okay, so that goes over all the initial life set gear. Think it just get a basic fracture or just, 2-stat, 3-stat rares, chill and start farming / purchasing items for the Ivory Tower swap, which I'm going to show you right now. The Ivory Tower swap is, I think I set it up, I have set up in standard right here, which is a level 97 character, but I didn't spec 2 passives because I wanted to showcase roughly level 95. I think that's about how long it will take you to get roughly around 10D of currency, is leveling up to level 95 if you're farming currency or you're farming a strategy and you're selling the various loot you get from that strategy. I think you'd be around level 95-ish when you have enough budget to start assembling these pieces. Now, to showcase the gear slots you're going to go for, Dune, 1 alch item, Ivory Tower, it's like 2 chaos item. It's very common. These are not going to be your price things that are going to destroy you on price. Shaper's Touch starts out a little bit expensive because it's, limited to Shaper, but by the time you're doing this, which is like maybe a day or 2 into the league, Shaper's Touch tanks in price to about 10 to 30 chaos, depending on, at what point you're starting to set up this gear set. So you have your uniques, your early cheap uniques, Glimpse of Chaos, another cheap unique that gives you good percent life, good percent ES. You can also go for a Crown of the Inward Eye, or even a rare helmet can be decent with how good Lich's Circlet is. So I would consider those as options as well. And then this right here could be put on your Mercenary for exposure, or if you just want it for extra clear. Legacy of Fury, I think, might get a big price upgrade this coming league because of Mercenaries. They're very, very free damage to put this on a Mercenary. So normally when I was planning this setup before the Mercenary and reveal and whatnot, I was thinking, oh, these boots are going to be, 50C, super cheap. I think with the Mercenaries, these might end up being like a Divine or a Divine and a half, maybe a little bit, maybe around that range. So you can just do regular percent Alberons, which would give you about another 1,000 ES and make you a bit stronger overall, but be cheaper. That option is there. So just keep an eye on the price of these boots based on what time of the league it is. They generally just tank in price pretty heavily because it's a very common drop from Maven. But initially, with Mercenaries being a thing, it might be in high demand because people are using it as a support item for their mercs. Now, after the basic uniques, rare ring, it's pretty much just get strength and int, plus maybe life, plus a res. It's not too complicated. You can do a basic trade search with the rare ring trade search I set up on trade. These should not be very expensive. I highlighted or showcased here T2 fracture stats. These work as well. ultimately, I think you're just going to have a cheaper time, or a more, you're going to have a better time getting a stronger ring just from buying it with the rare weighted Sum Search. You can buy a tier 2 Fracture and use an Essence on it, but I think you'll be able to get decent 2-3 stat rings with the weighted Sum Search without any issues. But the ideal stats are Strength, Int, Life, and then like a Res. That's what you're looking for on rings. And then for Belt and for Amulet, you have 2 different options that I'd recommend. And this basically depends on the price of things. Now, normally I would say percent strength, 1 implicit items are an easy go-to that are usually pretty cheap. That being said, strength stackers are very popular in the past league, and they might be popular in this league start too, which if these things become more expensive than like a divine or a divine and a half, I would recommend not doing them because there's a cheaper option. So percent strength, amulet, and belt, you can do this and just slam 1 strength essence on it and craft a res and call it a day. This is an option. Or the other option is using an Awakener Orb. Early league, Awakener Orbs are around 50C to a divine. They're very cheap early on because no one's really crafting with them early on. The thing is, with the items we're trying to make, we only care about the 2 stats being combined and then a bench craft. So let me showcase this right here. On the belt, we grab percent attribute and percent life from Elder and Hunter. We slam those 2 stats together, and then we bench craft, strength and int, and we're good to go. On the amulet, similar situation here. We grab percent strength and percent attribute, and we slam them together, and we craft either percent ES on the prefix pool or strength and int on the suffix pool. Same thing for the belt. If your suffixes fill, you'd craft like life here. That sort of option is available depending on which side has an open affix, and you're virtually the same power level between these 2 items. So let me showcase right now the difference that the belt and the amulet make. It's almost identical. So the character power right now is 11.7k ES, 1200 strength, 500 int, and our tooltip when I have life tap up is 580k tooltip. Just for example, in case the synth items get expensive, you always can go the Awakener Orb route just to compare. Now we're at 11.5 ES. We have more strength, less int, and our tooltip, once I hit the life tap, is 584. It's almost identical between a 1 Awakener Orb craft and cost versus the synth item. So just in case the synth items get expensive, you can just buy an Awakener Orb and slam 2 stats together, bench craft, and call it a day. That'll give you your initial power gear for the character. And this is when I think it'd be worth it to make the swap to Ivory Tower. One thing I want to point out about this character is the initial swap to Ivory Tower, you're not doing the Scion start. The Scion start value is dependent on a few things. It's dependent on Lethal Pride. So you want a Lethal Pride that has like percent strength on like these notables, or percent strength, flash strength, something like that. It is also contingent on Unnatural Instinct. Part of getting the huge benefit of the Lethal Pride here is having an Unnatural Instinct, which will give you a bunch of flat. And then the other thing you would need, in my opinion, is the other thing that makes this start valuable is split personalities. I think you can start this start without split personalities. It would be kind of like where you go like this and just straight up. Or once you get split personalities, that's when you do the pathing where you go around like this, where you go and you have a snake pattern. Split personalities you need to have at least strength, and then I'd say you want a second stat of life, ES, or best in slot is int for split personalities. But initially, when you're not at that gear level, Unnatural Instinct's expensive, split personalities can be expensive, Lethal Pride's expensive. We're trying to cut out all that initial cost for the initial swap over to Ivory Tower. You don't need that. We can just start a Templar start, and it's a pretty good time, in my opinion. All right. Whew. I think I should do a showcase for what this character looks like in the current state. I have, in my opinion, my favorite showcase is the white minnow. But we'll showcase a minnow with just less annoying stats. I'm just gonna keep rolling minus max res, or I'm gonna keep rolling more monster life. I want to give just a showcase of what it looks like at baseline value. We'll do Conk Ground, and then we'll get a little bit annoyed when Minotaur decides to land on top of Conk Ground. But I'll showcase this minnow right now on this initial setup. This setup is gonna be fine for farming just generic red mapped content. This will not be good enough for T17s. The damage is too low. We're at about 1.5 to 2 million damage, I think, roughly on this version of the character. So keep that in mind. This will be bread and butter for this character. Is going to be doing things like, oh, let's say, just like what I'm doing right now. Guardian boss rushing is one of my favorite strategies to do. You know, generate Maven fragments, generate conflict orbs, get awakened jewels. It can do stuff like that. And in this phase, you start basically picking certain gear slots to just go for specifically for upgrades. Like that list I have in the notes section, it tells you roughly which gear piece one by one and what order I would go for them in. That can vary a little bit depending on certain things might spike to abnormal prices or certain things might be cheaper than they normally are. I advise doing Unnatural Lethal Pride plus Split Personalities as one of your earlier pieces. If Unnatural Instinct goes to some obscene price, like let's say instead of being like 5 to 7 divines, it's like 20 divines out of nowhere for some reason, then I would say go for a 2-stat Helical before that, because 2-stat Helical is an insane upgrade. I just have it later on the list because normally Unnatural Instinct is a pretty affordable, reliable upgrade to go for after the current gear we have now. Now he's going to go underground. I'm going to proc my... Okay, one thing I'm going to say right now, just so we're clear, get the air clear. This is one of the most common ways to die on this character, is having a bit of a skill issue and pressing Vaal Righteous Fire right before you get hit by a big attack, i.e. a Minotaur Slam. And specifically, you are at its most dangerous. It's most dangerous when you press that Vaal RF in the early stage of this character. The way Vaal RF works is it sacrifices 60% of your total life and ES. It doesn't care how much life or ES you have currently. So for example, I have 7k life and I have 12k ES. At this point, 60% of that would be 18k times 60% is about 10,000. In other words, when I press that button, it'll take me down to like it'll take me down to the hundreds of ES. Very dangerous. It gets progressively less dangerous as you scale the character up, because you go from having 12k ES versus 7k life to having 10k life and 25k ES, and then 13k life and 40k ES. Like there's this exponential growth that happens on the ES side where it starts getting farther and farther away. When you press the Vaal Righteous Fire, it will, instead of leaving you with hundreds of ES, it'll leave you with multiple thousand. Anyways, point is skill issue. I pressed it and then proceeded to stand directly in the Minotaur Slam. Not the best display of skill. I will say this, one thing I did as well is I pressed Immortal Call right when I did the Vaal RF. The reason you do something like that is Immortal Call gives you DR so you can recover your ES faster. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of standing directly in the Minotaur Slam right when I did it. But anyways, I'm over explaining this, but it's something you'll learn as you play the character. Vaal Righteous Fire, initially, you need to be a little bit smart about when you press it. I'm not very smart when I press it, obviously. So learn from my mistakes, is what I would say. All right, let's try this again, Minotaur. Let's try this again. He should be fine to tank Minotaur. He does have on him a 20-ish% damage increase from the map mods we roll. If you ever feel like you're in danger and you're taking too many hits, you can always proc Immortal Call if you're seeing a big hit incoming and you want to tank it. Or let's say you have a lot of damage on your character. Obviously, I didn't really press that at a good time. I was trying to demonstrate you can press it when you're like when you press Vaal Righteous Fire and you take all your ES down, you need ES to recover, then you can pair those together, if that makes sense. But yeah, that was a Minotaur damage frenzy map. Obviously, this character has the tank for something like this, unless you do something very stupid, like press Vaal RF right before he slams. I don't want to talk about it. It's not the best display of skill. Anyways, this is the earliest I would say you could swap to Ivory Tower. Swapping before this, it's just going to not have the scaling necessary. It's going to be a bit too bricked. So I would say make sure you have at least this level of gear before swapping to Ivory Tower. Another thing I should say is Dune, at the current strength I have, which is 1200, is giving about 180% increased damage. This is probably going to be comparable / slightly weaker than a Scepter that has good dot multi. So initially, weigh out how good of a Scepter you can get versus Dune, because initially Dune might not be good enough to justify. As you get higher and higher strength, Dune becomes better and better, especially when you get the enchant, but just weigh the pros and cons out when you're looking at your early weapon, because initially the strength of the character at the very early stages is on the low side. All right, now let's go ahead and showcase with what the character looks like when you've progressed it quite a bit. And I also am going to go over a lot of gear crafting methods, roughly on the character. So this is the character when you've min-maxed it pretty well in League. You can get all the way to RF dot cap, and we'll showcase a, what's a good showcase? What is a good showcase? I guess we could showcase, Shaper. I'll do an Uber Shaper, and we'll talk about the character's progression or things that have changed on the character to get to this point. Quick overview is we've swapped to the split personality pathing. That's why the line is kind of like this orangish color. We've swapped to having Lethal Pride. You have Lethal Pride with percent strength, and the Lethal Pride makes all these small nodes next to this Unnatural Instinct give a lot of strength. So you can see when I take Unnatural Instinct in and out, you know, it makes a fairly big flat strength difference. When I take Lethal Pride, very big strength difference. It's how you justify this early pathing. And another thing is, on the min-maxing side of things for DPS, we've also gone for a multi-link helmet. You don't need to do this until you want to really start pushing DPS. One thing this does is it greatly decreases your AoE. Now, we do have an AoE mace. You can play without this if you want. You can play a block shield, but you're going to decrease your AoE quite a bit to do so. So, for example, this is the difference in an AoE mace. Obviously, it's quite large. If you're just doing boss rushing, single target stuff, you can go for the tank setup with a shield. That is your call. I like to play AoE mace because that means we can get some chain explodes with Arias Flask. If you're doing bossing, you do Soul Ripper, which allows you to get multiple Vaal RF usage in a row. If you're doing mapping, then you'll do Soul Ripper, or you'll do Arias End, and I'll showcase that after this. We'll start out with a showcase of an Uber Shaper on this setup. It's pretty much just going to be dual Curse Bane. If you do Bane with dual Curse and Enhance, you actually get 2 fully effect curses, actually slightly better than fully effect curses, because the quality on Bane makes you give increased curse effect. So even though Bane has like less curse effect built into it, the increased curse effect from quality on it makes it so there's actually curses are a little bit better than normal. I like it for a dual curse setup because it means you only have to cast 1 curse. You don't have to think about it too hard, and you get the damage regardless. Go ahead and see, they gave me one of the dudes with a lot of phases. Sure. Oh, another thing I wanted to say is I mentioned the Soul Ripper Flask, this flask all the way to the left, I use as a DPS flask. What that allows me to do is I can go and press Vaal RF while I'm fighting enemies like this guy right now. You saw how we just wiped his HP out. And you'll notice this flask right here, I can press it and I can refill this right now. I can proc it, I can refill the Vaal RF. I have that Vaal RF ready to go for when Shaper spawns, even though normally if I use my Vaal RF on this boss right next to Shaper, I wouldn't have it ready to go. And the thing is, while that boss is dying, while Shaper's doing his monologue, this flask is refilling charges. I have an enchant on it, which gives increased charges when it's not in use, and it's just preparing itself for the next time I need to do Vaal RF, which is why we can consistently have Vaal RF whenever we want it. Now, I'm not going to tank a slam with that on, but okay, because he was going to face it. All right. Sorry. Anyways, I was going to say don't press Vaal RF when he's about to slam. We might have been fine on this character's gear level with the amount of ES left over with Immortal Call, but sometimes it's better being safe than sorry. And this is what the DPS looks like with Vaal RF on Uber Shaper. Obviously, we're kind of cooking at this point. This is the multi-link. This is we've invested in the dot multi. You don't have to go this high in a DPS. You can invest, you know, more into sustain. You can invest more into strength for more AoE, or you can invest into a bit of dot multi and get some good single target like this. And again, I want to mention the Soul Ripper. You know, let's say I wasn't at this level of min-max. Say you were in an earlier stage and you needed multiple Vaal RFs to get through multiple different phases of Shaper. That's why you'd have the Soul Ripper, so you'd be ready to proc that when necessary. I guess I should have chosen maybe a less stall fight than Uber Shaper, but yeah, it's too late now. We already started it. He's going to proc his slam. You're going to proc Vaal RF. He's going to phase. Oh, this is a good example. He's phased. I used Vaal RF. I can press this again. Boom, I have Vaal Righteous Fire for the next use because of, you know, sometimes he phases when you, sometimes he phases like right when you're about to DPS him or whatever. So like normally that Vaal RF would have been enough to just take him straight to the next phase, but he instant went to that ball phase. And so we had the Vaal RF ready to go the next time he was there. So hopefully I'm making sense what the reason is for using Soul Ripper. It's specifically for the stall fights, Cirrus, Shaper, a lot of the Ubers. Other than that, your single target should never really need Vaal RF. It's pretty much only those fights where it's relevant. And the fun thing is, because this character gets beyond a dot cap damage, is with Ubers, it actually matters to have more than dot cap because of their DR. The 70% less DR means dot cap, instead of being 35 million, is actually like 100 million, which is kind of cool. Speaking of dot cap, I hopefully won't forget, but I want to showcase how dot cap bugs out when you have a dot skill that deals dot cap before any other factors take place, which is, I think is pretty funny. I should have procced my Vaal RF sooner, but I wasn't really paying attention. But yeah, anyways, that is an Uber Shaper and what it looks like on the in-league. This is obviously Settlers League character. This previously was my Pox League 2. We made this character in about a month's game time, and yeah, that's the showcase of what you can do in League before you get to Legacy Gear. This is Editor Lance cutting into the video because there were some things I forgot to cover about the RF Scion. Very importantly, flasks. When it comes to this character, people are wondering, hey Lance, do you have permanent uptime? How can you justify res from your flasks? How does that work? It is pretty simple. You need, number one, the Pathfinder Ascendancy, either through Forbidden Flesh and Flames or just speccing it. Once you have the Pathfinder Ascendancy, that's 3 flash charges per second, you have flash generation, and you have chance to not consume. You combine that with the reuse at the end of Flask Mod. The way this works is you're turning on the flasks at the start of each zone, and they will last, and they will keep queuing until they run out. Now, without any other investment, these will last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 uses in a row, somewhere in the range of like 40 to 70 seconds. This is not enough for stall fights, but for every other like mapping, regular bosses that don't have stall phases, this is effectively permanent uptime, because as you fight monsters, you will top off your flasks, and that 70-second duration is going to get reset as you're killing monsters. You know, most maps you'll clear faster than 70 seconds or close to it, so this is fine. But you'll see Coruscating Elixir fell off in the duration of me talking. When it comes to a stall fight, I'm talking about Uber Cirrus, Maven, fights with a bunch of like weird phases in between where they have dialogue and you're waiting around, you need to swap in an Overflowing Chalice onto your flasks. Now, what does this do? Overflowing Chalice, when it's active, gives you a bunch of extra charge generation during the course of this flasks. So I turn this on, and my flash gen during this, these charges are going to be more than normal. You use a use when full for Overflowing Chalice, and you use when full for Quicksilver, and the idea is effectively every time this thing procs, it helps catch up the charges on your other flasks, because these things are draining over time, and it allows you to do fights like Cirrus, Maven, stuff like that, the stall fights. Outside of Overflowing Chalice, you can get about roughly 10 to 20% flash duration via tattoos or suffixes on jewels if you want it to get to really perfect sustain, but it's just unnecessary. It's extra build investment that could go into actual character power. That's up to you, but that's how the flasks work. Generally use Quicksilver all the time, except if you're doing a really long stall fight. Notice how I've had these flasks running. They've been essentially staying topped off because we swapped in this flask. It's just something you swap in for the stall fights like Cirrus, with a lot of phases where he's dialoguing, where he's up in the clouds, where he's wasting time, stuff like that. So anyways, besides the flask, the other thing I forgot to go over is the build's variety in the weapon and shield slot. Number one is, do you want to be min-max tank? There is an option for that, and that is recover on block shield. If I were to use this shield and I were to spec these 3 passives with the mastery for chance to block spell based on your attack block, you'll notice this shield has 52 block. What that ends up doing is this takes me to about 72 block With Guardian, it goes to 78 capped attack block, and then it takes me to around like 60 to 70 spell block with the Guardian as well. And so we have very good spell block with Giga recover from the block. That's what you do to go to like pseudo immortality, where you're just not dying to shotgun damage at all, and you're just really not dying. It's an option you can do. It gives you shield charge. The downside of doing this is you cannot run Dune plus AoE. You either have to run Dune for max single target, or you have to run AoE. So you have that option there. Another option is, let's say you like Dune, but you like AoE more. If you really want to go max AoE, that would involve, instead of running Dune, you could run 2 AoE maces. Now, just for contrast, I'm going to show you the single target difference this makes. Right now, we have about 11 million tooltip damage with the ideal enchant on Dune. We're going to compare that to a okay mace. It could be a little bit better with the unveiled percent fire damage, which will be easier to hit now with Veiled Chaos, but it is a damage downgrade. But it's what you can do if you want to go for more AoE, and you'll see our damage dropped from 11 million to 8 million. So it was a fairly sizable damage drop. It would be less of a sizable damage drop if we had the extra unveil be about, maybe we'd be at 9 million or something. But the point is, double AoE, you lose damage, but you get bigger AoE. This is Conk Effect, by the way. You can play without Conk Effect, you lose more damage, and you can go for like Enhance and get like screen-wide, planet-size AoE. That's an option as well. That's pretty much just a clear speed option. Play how you want, but those options exist. And then the other option is, instead of a recover on block shield, you can go for just the scaling option, which is percent strength, percent ES, that sort of shield, which is something like the legacy standard shield we have is an example where you have the synth implicits. That's a mere tier sort of investment thing. Ultimately, the best in slot shield would be if we had the ability to get recover on block on a synth implicit, but as far as I can tell, the recover energy shield on block is no longer a synth implicit, and it's only available for Shaper. So just to reiterate, big AoE, you can go double AoE at AoE mace. Big damage is you want Dune in the build, and then if you want to go for big tank, you go for recover on block. And then if you want a hybrid between tank / damage, you can go for like a synth shield. So I just wanted to cover these things because I forgot to. Back to the rest of the video. I am going to showcase legacy gear and standard, but before we do that, I want to go over some advice on how to craft a few things. On stream, I recorded a session of how to do a helical ring, so I'm going to cut that in right now, and it's going to explain how helical crafting works, and then we'll cut back to here. When it comes to helical crafting, there are budget ways to do helicals, and there are non-budget ways to do helicals. The budget way is you're only going for 2 good stats. For our character, we're going for all attribute and strength roll. Now you'll notice on this ring, there's also min endurance, and you'll notice the all attribute is not a rolled mod. The reason for this is the benchcraft is like 90% as good as the T1 mod. So just to clarify, you see T1 mods goes to 16, the benchcraft goes to 13. The difference is this can go up to 22, this can go up to 27. And it costs a hell of a lot more to get the non-benchcraft mod because on average, you'll do 100+ essences to hit it. So option number 1 is you do Rage Essence until you hit a perfect divine of it and annul off the extra mods, and then you just multi-mod all attribute and min endurance. This is the cheapest example of a helical that can be very good. Just to compare with my helical right here that I've been wearing on this pretty high invested character for a long time, this is only a 2-stat helical. It's strength and all attribute, and the all attribute roll, when I missed it, was I believe it was a 14 roll, which is only 1 better than the benchcrafted 13. This cost quite a bit more to hit these 2 stats over just doing something like this where you just essence until you get a good roll strength, because not only once you essence till you hit the all attribute, you have to divine it after the fact, which can cost you more money. Whereas if you just benchcraft, you might have to redo the multi-mod 1 or 2 times if you hit like min roll attributes, but just hitting like a 12 or a 13 is generally pretty fine. So this is the cheapest option, and it has you, I don't know if the odds are exactly 50%, maybe it's a little bit worse than 50% to get strength and attribute to go in the same direction, and that is a win scenario. It's the minimal cost to get you a good ring. Next up, the one I've been referencing is the one where you spend essences until you hit all attributes, T1, and then you have to annul off extra mods. This can spend anywhere from like 100, 200, even 300 rage essences. You can sink, and you'll just keep missing annuls. Stuff can happen, and it's only marginally better. Generally, I don't even recommend doing this I think you'd be better off doing this method, and then when you're ready to go for a 3-stat helical, you would skip this step entirely because it's only marginally better than step 1, which costs way less. So when you start talking about 3 stats, first of all, these 2-stat rings where strength and all attribute go positive, you'll notice they have plus min endurance on there. Technically, min endurance, if it goes negative, isn't really a downside, but if it goes positive, it is a nice upside. So these can end up being decent 3 stats. Min endurance is kind of like, maybe it's a half stat. Maybe it's a 2.5 stat is how you could wager out its value. Next up, we're talking about fracturing for a 3-stat. It's hard enough to craft the 2-stat with just rage essences. If you want to craft a 3-stat, like let's say dot multi strength all attribute, you kind of need either dot multi or strength to be fractured and then essence to hit the 3rd stat. This is an example where we missed the fracture. I had T1 strength, I had T1 dot multi, I went to fracture, and I hit regen. Now, this is an outright brick. The thing is, though, even when you brick your fracture like this, there is still a non-zero chance that you can make a good ring out of it. Basically, we have to hit a 1 in 10 where strength and dot multi both go positive with regen, or you have to be playing, let's say, a life-based character where that negative regen is not a big issue. For our build, a low life character, that negative regen will PK our character every time we stand on like Cirrus ground or Awakener ground or Maven laser, anything that disables recovery. That negative regen will end up auto killing us, but it can resell to a life-based strength style character when that negative regen isn't as much of a downside. So we'll send a mist on this anyways. And then for the last ring, this is something I almost never recommend. I was trying to make a 3-stat where I just had strength plus dot multi plus like all attribute, but I hit T2 int top rolled and T1 all life. The thing about this is a scenario where you're basically YOLOing for like the best possible ring imaginable. The likelihood this goes all positive is very low. All positive on a mist is like 1 in 50 or something. And I want to send it just because it sounded like something fun to do. I do not recommend doing this at all in the slightest. You'd be better served if you have a 3-stat, and a 3-stat odd of hitting is more like 1 in 10, so it's feasible to do. Now, when I'm referencing creating a mist, the upside of all these things, none of this is a guarantee that you're going to hit the mist when you do it, but the upside is whenever you missed a ring, whenever I click this button, it will generate 2 rings, and you can do 5-to-1 recipes to get your clean base back. So the mist cost, every time you do it, gives you 80% of the value of your ring back. Just to showcase this, I'll showcase the vendor recipe right now. I would never do this with clean bases unmisted, but 5 rings will give you a clean base back, which you can then split again to get 2 more rings. So let's showcase the mist right now, where we'll hit every single one of these. I will do 1 lock on this 5 positive one just for the fun of it. Ultimately, I almost never recommend doing Helical locks on these because Helical lock value is... The cost of the Helical lock is generally way more than the cost it is to craft up the ring and just send a mist blindly. The only reason you do Helical locks is if I made like a perfect 5-stat ring that's actually expensive to recreate and you're just giga investing to make the best possible item. I don't recommend doing this. We're just doing it for fun. So to start things off with, we're going to hit the first mist and we'll see how this goes. And we have positive strength, positive attribute. This is a very good ring. This thing will last you for like days on days. It's very hard to beat this. The only way to beat this style ring is to get a 3-stat. And this is a pretty likely outcome. Getting your strength and your all attribute to go the same direction it's close to a 50% chance to occur. It's pretty high. Granted, we didn't get the best multiplier on this, but that's 200 plus strength on a ring. Very, very good outcome. This is one thing you'd equip this and you'd wear it for a long time. Next up, we have the better divined roll because it's a T1 craft, and technically it has aspect of the spider. Depending on your build, sometimes you can work in aspect, sometimes you can't. I didn't say this earlier, but aspect craft is one of those mods that if it goes negative or positive, it does the same thing. So it's less of a downside if it goes negative, if that makes sense. I didn't say this earlier, but typically when you're doing misting your rings, you want to make sure the stats that aren't the stats you care about, if they go negative, do not negatively impact your build. So like right here, the negative mana and the negative min endurance, they do not make my character worse at all. Minimum endurance technically means you can't go like grand spectrums to get a bunch of min endurance in your build. We wouldn't be doing that anyways, but Point is, if it went positive, it would have been a good thing, but it going negative does not detract from the value of putting this on my character. So now we're going to send this next one and see how we do. We got positive strength, positive all attribute, and we got, yeah, so that's another win. This is another ring that would have been usable. Ultimately, I'd recommend just doing the cheaper version of this. That's easier to craft, but that's another just outright win. And now, where we're probably much more likely to lose, I'll give another example of maybe getting lucky. And we'll see. This one went, oh my word, we got away with it. So this went positive strength, positive dom, multi-positive regen. Even though we missed the fracture, this is still a good ring. Now the upside is, every single good ring we hit, you put to the side. These are things you could use on your build. You could play with that. But every single brick you hit is vendor food to give you back a new base. So like all these bricks, I can do with these other bricks. We get a clean base that we can then split for 2 more bases, and we can craft more if we want to. Every time people talk about misting and rings, they act like they're expensive. A large amount of your cost is paid for to keep going and keep trying. When you miss, you get a large amount of the base cost back. So the initial cost of the base is expensive, but you get that value back from the bricks that can do the vendor recipe. And now for the final ring, the only way this thing wins is strength, all int, all attribute going positive all together. It would be good for a CI build, attribute stack, a strength int stack, or if by some miracle all stats go positive, but that's literally just, that doesn't happen. So let's see. Missed, and we got negative all attribute, negative life, positive strength, positive int, positive dom multi. The thing about this is a very bad multiplier. Even if I hit a 3-stat with this, I'd be a little bit disappointed, because the mist, it has a multiplier roll range from 1.5 to 2.1, and this looks like it's a bottom roll. This is probably a 1.5 multiplier. Very unfortunate when you hit this. So what we're gonna do in order to go again on this ring is we're gonna recraft and we're gonna blind send it. The likelihood this is a brick is all but guaranteed. The only way this is not a brick is if we hit all positive or strength, int, and all attribute going together. So the final hits, and it is, yeah, that's a brick. Holy, it's no, it's just outright. That's just an outright brick. That's not usable. I was gonna try to say maybe it could be usable for something. That's usable for basically nothing. When you have attributes go negative and positive in opposite directions, very hard to make a build that wants to put it on. So yeah, so there's the brick. I don't recommend doing a 5-stat. You definitely usually want to go for 3-stat as your highest value, about a 1 in 10 chance to hit. If you start thinking and dreaming about a 4-stat, you're just in delusional la la land, where either you are the richest player on the server and you could just afford to just lock over and over and over again, or you're delusional. It's those two options. Generally, going for 3-stat is a reasonable thing that you can do over the course of a league. It's a 1 in 10 to hit. Whereas going for a 5-stat or a 4-stat, very unlikely. You're going to burn a lot of currency trying to hit it. Because most of the time, you're just going to hit bricks that you need to vendor recipe and go again. And the cost of making the base to 5 mods is also expensive. So yeah, that is the Helical Mistcraft. I kept showcasing it, but I'll actually showcase how it becomes 2 rings. We have these bricks right here. One thing I want to showcase as well is the item level of the recipe is dependent on the lowest level of the rings vendored. So this is 82, this is 82, this is 79, this is 79. We will get a 79 ring. You could have 4 86 rings. You have one 79 ring, and you will make the ring outcome be level 79. Now 79, you might think, is a brick. For the 3-stat ring, that is the case. But for the 2-stat ring like this, it is not a brick. And the reason is, level 82 is required to hit T1 strength, T1 int, T1 dex. The thing is, though, if you're essencing for strength, you're getting a higher roll of strength anyways. Like if I'm highlighting this strength in attribute ring right here, you're essencing the strength ring, and then you're bench crafting anyways. This still gives you a very good 2-stat, but keep that in mind when you're doing these vendor recipes. Depending on what type of mods you need to hit, you may need a higher item level. Show the chance or a vendor recipe. Yeah, there's another thing to pay attention as well. If people use a gilded fossil on this ring, it'll brick the vendor recipe, and in which case you're just done for. So yeah, we have the level 79 ring that we got from the vendor, and all we need to do is go over here. We can do this recipe right here, split in half. You would think, why don't you split in 3? The reason for this is it requires a 6 mod item. Helical can only have up to 5 mods, so you can never do the triple split, but you can do the double split. If you could triple split the helical, you could literally infinitely print helicals at a positive ratio whenever you missed, because you could turn 5 rings that you brick into 1 base, and then you could split it into 3, which you could turn into 6 bases. But yeah, so it's probably for the best that you can't infinitely print helicals, because it would destroy the heist economy for heist bases, essentially. But yeah, that's the life cycle of doing the Mistcraft. Now that gave you guys a good look at how to craft helical, I think there was one thing I forgot to go over in that session of crafting, which is specifically when you start looking at crafting a 3-stat dot multi plus strength plus dot multi. One of the upsides of doing that is when you miss, like dot multi goes negative, the strength all attribute ring will resell for good money to strength stackers. So one of the things that happens a lot of times when you're doing a helical build that cares about dot multi is on a stat stacker specifically. I've done this with instack and strength stack previous builds I've made where I've been playing a dot build and I've been going for dot multi as a 3rd stat. Is those stat stacker builds, they don't care if dot multi goes negative, and they will pay full resale value for a good 2-stat of those other 2 stats. And what ends up happening a lot of times when you're making helicals, between those vendor recipe resells and between the things that hit but they don't hit for your build, is those resells end up paying your crafting costs to keep going. I think pretty much every league, we'll see if helicals keeps getting more and more expensive. We'll see if this changes, but pretty much every league I've made a good helical, I have almost paid all of my craft costs with bricks, and bricks that are good for other people. Like when you hit a good brick for somebody else, the resale value usually pays for a lot of the bricks you've made along the way. And the vendor recipe helps make the cost of those bases be a lot less painful, because you only lose 20% of the value of the ring every time you miss, because you can vendor recipe 5 to 1. All right, so besides that, I want to talk a bit about gear pieces that would be very good for the character, that will be one of your earlier priorities for min-maxing. We've been told Recombinators are coming back to the game. And from the interview, it sounded like Mark said they weren't planning to nerf it. Now, there's no guarantee that's the case. Part of me doesn't even believe they wouldn't add it back unnerfed. But if it is the case, there are multiple gear slots that are very good with Recombinators. Hunter Belt, Pure Strength Crusader, Pure Strength Warlord, Amulet, Recover on Block Shield, and Rare Boots. Also, technically, the AoE Mace and the Multi-Link Helmet can also be made using Recombinators. These gear slots are very big power upgrades, and they're pretty straightforward. I have linked in this like note section here, I have linked the video on how to do Recombinators. Basically, it's the exclusive mod method. It's pretty much the main way you do Recombinators, where you basically take good stat, multi-mod, add an aspect, slam them together, and boom, you have a 2-stat. And you'd make that, and you do another 2-stat, and then you make the 2-stat into a 3-stat, doing that same method, and then you combine these 2 together to get a 5-stat, and all of a sudden you have a really good rare. That's the method, so to speak. That being said, I don't have an example gear slot, but when I reference Pure Strength Warlord, I would do this sort of method. Go for percent strength, flat strength, damage per strength, all attribute strength, and something like percent energy shield. And you can benchcraft like maybe AoE or life, or you can go for flat life and benchcraft percent ES. That sort of amulet will give you a good bridge between the basic Awaken Orb amulet and something to chill on until you can afford to go for the Simplex craft. Because let's be honest, Simplex is probably the strongest item on this entire character, and it's a, cornerstone of the whole build. You want a decent amulet to chill with until you can farm out the currency to go for that upgrade. So, Recombinate craft, check out this video here. And then as for another craft, once you do get to the point where you're looking at a Simplex craft, I have a video on how to do Simplex crafting. In short, it's basically Recombinators are the multi-link method, where you get a bunch of the ideal bases, or you just buy the items with the affixes already on them, annul off the extra stuff, multi-link, add a bunch of Betrayal exclusive mods, slam them together. We don't know if Recombinators are being nerfed. Mark acted like they weren't going to nerf him, but we'll see. So we're probably going to test that early league, and I'll make an update video on whether or not Recombinators got nerfed at some point is my plan. And then for the Simplex, it is a Helical lock beast method using Morgans and Krajic Chimerals. Check out the video. It'll explain it. I don't want to do that, go into that whole explanation here because it'll bog down an already long video on the guide. And same thing, Recombinators for Mace, boots, or a recover on block shield if you want, multi-link helmet. All that stuff is recombinated related. Now, aside from the recombinated gear pieces, clusters are the next gear piece. And speaking of which, I do want to showcase crafting clusters on the previous versions of the build because I forgot to go over that. Cluster craft is basically when you're going for the min-max stuff, it's hitting a fracture and then doing fundamental spam or reforge life or chaos orbs. And at the very least, I'd go for T1 attribute, T1 strength, and you need at least 25 effect. Life could be something like percent damage, or it could be something like flat ES. Those are pretty okay settles. That's not your best in slot, but clusters can be a pain, and sometimes just settling for a one-off hit is a reasonable way to go. Speaking of cluster crafting, I want to showcase real quick. I have the life-based clusters and showcase how easy it is to make these in case people are thinking these are expensive. They're just not. They're super easy to craft. You'll notice this cluster I have right here has effect, some chaos res, life, and int. All this cluster is a item level. I mean, this could be anything from 67 to 83. The stats you can hit are the same. The only difference is if you get an 84 cluster, that's when you can start hitting the T1 small passive things where you can hit 35 effect, T1 chaos res, stuff like that. But initially, you're just going to be doing chaos reforges. Life force typically starts out at about 1C to anywhere from 60 to 100. So this is about, and you go on D&D. This is about going to cost you 1C to 2C per click early league doing Reforged Chaos. Obviously, it gets more expensive as people start gambling Yellow Life Force, but initially it's super cheap. Chaos always hits, Reforged Chaos always hits Chaos Res, and you're just looking for Chaos Res plus maybe percent damage or flat life or all res. Pretty much any little combination of okay stats will work. It shouldn't take you too many clicks to hit something halfway decent where you're spending anywhere from, I'd say, 10 to 30 chaos. Another option is technically, well, okay, I don't know if this is still a thing or not, but Guff used to, as far as I know, if Guff isn't changed, you could take a white cluster, put it on Guff, and chaos spam until you hit something that's halfway decent. That is another really good budget way to do this. But otherwise, I'd say Chaos Reforge is fantastic, and this helps you cap your Chaos Res early without needing a bunch of expensive Chaos Res gear throughout your other pieces, and that's typically what I would recommend doing. And it's basically just this right here. You're looking for Chaos Res plus some other decent small stats. Life Strength's good, percent damage is good, 25 effect is good. You don't really want to hit a notable. You're just trying to looking for just some halfway okay stats. Attack and cast speed normally would be good on like other types of builds, but for this character, not so good. So anyways, percent strength, percent damage, good. You're just looking for some halfway okay stat that's going to help you fix your chaos res, and you're just going to be chilling. This one had, for example, percent damage, 25 effect, and 3 chaos res. Fantastic, chuck it on. It's just helping you get your chaos res in your build. That's mainly what this is for, along with some okay percent damage. So that's the cheap clusters for the early life based. And then for the less cheap clusters, when you're doing for your initial swap over to life-based, or sorry, your initial swap over to Ivory Tower, these clusters, I would say they need to be at least item level 84 so you can hit T1 strength. And then they can be anywhere from 9 to 11. They don't have to be 12 passives. You can buy a little bit cheaper clusters. And I would recommend doing either straight up Chaos Orbs or Reforged Life or Fundamental Fossils. All those methods work. The main thing I would say is you need to have at least T1 strength with either, I'd say, like a T2 all attribute or a T2 effect. You're just kind of trying to make like a 2-stat something or other to get you started. So that's what this is here. These are some examples of clusters we made. Don't overthink it too much. It doesn't have to be anything insane. Just T1 strength plus some okay stats to go with it. This is just getting you started. You're trying not to spend too much currency. Don't overthink it too much. That's the initial clusters I would go for. Sorry, I wanted to go over that real quick because I forgot to go over it earlier. and I figured I should fit that in. Okay. I think I have covered most of the basics in and outs of the gear progression in a normal league. One more thing I will say about the character as a whole is min-max wise, if you want to go for single target, dot multi is insane. If you want to hit dot cap, you're going to need either dot multi adorned or you're going to need a 3-stat helical. Like if this 3rd stat on my ring had dot multi on it, then I could just go pure strength everywhere else, and I wouldn't need dot multi on the jewels to hit dot cap. But if you want to hit dot cap, then you're going to need dot multi on your jewels, like a malevolence dot multi, like dot multi from adorned. Okay, so that is pretty much what you can expect for min-maxing if you're talking about in league. This can obviously get better with mere tier level gear that's not quite there. This is gear I assembled in 1 month in Pox League 2 with a limited economy. Now let's talk if you really want to min-max. Let's say you want a project to min-max in standard. Let's showcase what the character can be when you factor in legacy gear. Specifically, I'm talking about legacy shapers of touch and legacy adorned. What is so important about these items? The legacy version of Shaper's Touch gives you twice the amount of percent ES increase, which effectively means when you swap this for a regular Shaper's Touch, you essentially double your ES scaling. And the other big thing that changes in standard that's crazy for the character is adorned. Wherever I have it socketed, it goes to a crazy number. Honestly, just a 143, something like that in standard will still be insane, but you can see right here when I put this on, it makes a massive difference in overall scaling for the build. Another fun fact about the build is, let's say you wanted to go like, you wanted to have 100 million plus DPS, you wanted to do Uber dot cap, you could go multi-link helmet. There is somebody who has a multi-link helmet in standard. You can look that up. I completely spacing on his name, but I know there's somebody who made a Giga multi-link helmet as an option. The thing is though, when you push too much damage on Righteous Fire in standard, it showcases a very interesting bug. Something even worse than dot cap. So right now, let me showcase something very, very funny. This character, you'll see, has a tooltip that says 34 million damage. You'll notice if I go in, if I have a random map example, I can showcase real quick here. I'll showcase this bog. I'll showcase this random bog map. Just because I think this is the funniest thing to me. This is something you don't really see very often because I think it requires a dot skill that is hitting dot cap without any other factors. Like it's dot cap before you even consider res. Fun little thing you can showcase. But all right, so you'll notice enemies are dying, right? We are doing damage. Enemies are dying. Now, if I were to make one tiny little change, let's say instead of having this jewel, which has strength, I put in another dot multi jewel. In other words, I'm adding more damage to the build. You'll notice something about the tooltip changes. There is no damage number on this tooltip. The fun fact is, if you have a dot skill that hits dot cap before you even consider debuffs, other scaling, you'll notice these enemies are not dying. They're not taking damage at all. If you hit dot cap on just your base dot skill, Vaal RF, regular RF, you end up dealing literally 0 damage if you push the damage too high. So something to keep in mind, if you play the build in standard, you need to keep your damage high, but not too high. If you push it too high, if you get too much damage things on your tree, you will go beyond the dot cap and then you will actually just deal 0 damage. Kind of fun little factoid of playing RF in standard. Another fun fact about this build is you can go Headhunter if you want to. There are rares that have life and ES scaling buffs. It actually is comparable or competitive with like this Giga Chad triple legacy mirror tier belt. So that is an option as well in base league if you want to go more of a mapping approach. And you can also go Giga AoE scaling. Like right now you'll say this is pretty good at AoE with one mace. I didn't showcase this, but you can do this in league as well, where instead of running something like Efficacy, you could run something like Enhance, which increases the AoE, and then let's say you run increased AoE instead of Awakened Elemental Focus. I wouldn't recommend it because it's only a small change in AoE, but it is a change nonetheless. As you can see, it's a very slight radius increase there. There are ways to push the AoE up and up. Ultimately, in League, you can get a circle that's maybe about this big, you know, maybe 20% smaller, 10% smaller, 15% smaller, something like that. But in Standard, with really Giga Chad min-max gear, this AoE mace gets a little bit silly. So yeah, this was just to showcase the potential of how far you could take the character if you want to. I tried to give you guys loadouts that showcase the character progression all the way from the very beginning of being a Spectral Throw Poisonous Concoction character, to swapping to Righteous Fire, to your fresh SSF gear, to your early life-based gearing, to your first time I'd recommend swapping to Ivory Tower, to what the gear looks like if you've min-maxed each of your pieces in League. You can get all the way to Righteous Fire dot cap, or if you take it to Standard, you can become just a god among men walking around at 200,000 plus ES. It gets a little bit crazy on the high end of the Legacy gear. Okay, my throat's kind of dead now. Hopefully this, guys, gives you guys a good look at how to do Scion Righteous Fire, goes over most of the important pieces of progression on this style of character. You can always come by stream and ask me for information about this build, and I could try to give you recommendations if you want to progress it. I just wanted to make this because I really like this build. It's my favorite Righteous Fire build. I am not playing this on League Start. I just wanted to make a guide for it because my Crucible one is kind of out of date, and I wanted to update it and do a bit of a better job going over the options for you. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video on Righteous Fire Scion. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care, and I forgot something. I forgot to showcase in League mapping for the AoE mace and the option to go explode if you want good aesthetics. I'm gonna go over this real quick because I forgot to go over it. One little factor about playing the AoE mace, so like you run the explode flask, and the thing is, with Righteous Fire, you have AoE from this mace, from all your strength. You know, 4k strength gives you like 250 AoE from the mace. You have like 40 AoE from the Unnatural Instinct. You have a bunch of AoE scaling, and then you have a bunch of generic percent damage. Dune gives you generic percent damage. Simplex gives you generic percent damage. What this means is, when these enemies explode, their AoE is pretty large, and the generic damage makes the explosion just kill the enemy next to it. Now, the thing about Arias End is, Arias End doesn't look very cool. It's kind of like lame looking is what I would say. It's just not very interesting to looking. So I'm gonna showcase Breach real quick here. Let's say we chuck in a random, do I have just like a dunes laying around that we could showcase? Random dunes. So let's say we go in here. Let's say we're running Breach. Now with the multi-link helmet, you're forced into Conk effect, which makes your AoE kind of small. But the thing is, you can still get some pretty good chain explodes. Now, that being said, these chain explodes, they look okay with the coin MTX. They're all right. But if you wanted to make this explosion a lot more prominent, if you really want to see some nice big booms going on, what you can do is you can say, screw having 20 DR, I want an aesthetic upgrade, and you can go grab Herald of Ash. And then you can put on whatever Herald of Ash MTX you want, which I guess we have Despair on, so we'll showcase. This is probably the loudest MTX you can do, but we'll showcase this very quickly. And all of a sudden, your explosions, they look a lot more, let's say, aesthetic to the eyes, for the reason of seeing more things go kaboom. Don't recommend it in terms of character power. It doesn't make the build stronger, but it gives it that fun factor. This character has enough power level where losing out on the 20% DR is generally not the I'm killing my League Start luck. What am I doing? That was not supposed to happen. Let's just all ignore that divine drop. I need to get out of this map before I drop a mirror or something stupid. I can't be dropping good things before League Start. Okay, that's not ideal. Okay, but anyways, you can swap in Herald of Ash just to make the build more aesthetically pleasing. If you want to, that is an option. I played most of Pox League with a Herald in just because it looked cool, because we didn't really need the tank for T17 maps we were doing. There was a couple maps where you roll bad enough mods, you can die, But overall, I just preferred having the cool aesthetic of the explosions, and that's what was going on there. Okay, now I'm going to pause real quick and make sure I didn't forget anything super important. Aside from that, don't think I did. I probably did. But yeah, we're going to call it there. Thanks for watching, Exiles. Hopefully you enjoyed the video on the RF Scion. And upcoming videos on me, I will be doing probably a video going over my plan to maybe do Poisonous Concoction Bouncing Elementalist, as well as I will probably be updating the Energy Blade Inquisitor for League Star for those that want that guide. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one.